showing.
And then record too.
Okay, we're streaming.
And Patrick is here.
Great. Well, welcome everyone to the April 20th meeting of the Planning and Economic. Welcome everyone, and thank you to joining us for the April 20th meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. Call the meeting to order. Now all of our committee members are here. I'll go around the Zoom room and introduce committee members. First Ward Alderperson Brock is here. Second Ward Alderperson Brown is here. Third Ward Alderperson Gerhardt. Fourth Ward Alderperson Mailer. Myself, Laura Lewis, Fifth Ward Alderperson and PEDC Chair. So now we'll begin the meeting by turning to public comment. I will just remind our commenters that you will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, we will thank you for your input. And our first speaker,
Patrick Braga.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Braga. I'm Vice President of Development at VISM Development Group. And VISM had submitted a response to the Collegetown Fire Station RFEI. So I'd like to make 2 points. First is that the city is going to be spending more public money than it needs to with the selected proposal because they opted for a lower purchase price than what VISM had proposed. And second, the disposition process for the fire station has been really opaque. And the city would likely get a better public policy outcome if the decision-making process were more transparent and openly competitive. So to my first point, VISM's original proposal had been to demolish the fire station and rebuild it on site in the lower levels of a new building in exchange for building apartments on top. And even though that initially might sound unusual, it's been done in other cities. And living above a fire station is hardly different than the current living situation at Collegetown Crossing, where people are living next to the fire station. But even if the fire station were rebuilt off-site, our proposed purchase price was significantly higher than the acquisition price on the table now. So the city is needlessly spending more public dollars to be repaid by property taxes, to be held as a burden by homeowners and other property owners alike, than it needs to. Which leads to my second point, which is why was this process so absolutely opaque? The city is disposing a public asset, so the community should have a say in that. Not to mention that VISM never heard back from the city or got any comments, and we only found out about this meeting thanks to an Ithaca Voice article this morning. I mean, think back to 2018 when the city tried to sole source the Green Street Garage redevelopment and there was community pushback, and as a result of a reopened competitive process, it got a higher quality result, which is the mixed income Asteri project that's being built now. So in sum, the fire station disposition process should be reopened and done transparently so the city doesn't spend tens of thousands more dollars than it needs to for the new station. Thank you.
thank you, Patrick. And our next speaker,
Reggie Teasley.
Great, thank you. I'm speaking about the Ithaca Green New Deal. Ithaca has indicated that can be a leading small city in addressing climate change goals. Luis and Rebecca have made a bold and serious start. Now we must all roll up our sleeves and get into the hard work. We know that equitable and diverse workplaces are not created by hiring a director of diversity, but by changing culture and practice. Green New Deal is like rethinking public safety, thoroughgoing, requiring participation and shifted priorities among all involved. I would just ask, have members of Common Council thought deeply about the implications of this project? And probably you have, and I would just urge you to do so. Major change is challenging, and there is always more to consider. How is Common Council altering business as usual to achieve these agreed upon outcomes? We are already in the middle of dramatic climate change, and we are feeling the effects. I think of the long overdue FEMA flood maps and flood insurance rate changes as the latest impacts. We find ourselves playing catch up with environmental and economic and social challenges. The Green New Deal points to the better way to respond. And I do want to say, please don't forget green space as we build and work to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, hopefully before then if we can. The sooner we achieve these goals, the less likely we are to spend time and money on the system we are leaving. But all the talk in the world won't get us there. Only our shared commitment and effort will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie. Do we have any additional speakers for public comment?
No, we have no more speakers.
All right, any response from any committee members or other common council members who are joining us tonight? We will be speaking about both the topics that our public commenters addressed as we move through our agenda. Okay. All right, we have 3 reports that we will be discussing tonight. So right now I'll turn it over to Luis Aguirre-Torres, Director of Sustainability, to present on the electrification project and the kickoff. Thank you, Luis.
Hi. I did prepare some slides, so I'm gonna try to use them wisely, but please just interrupt me if I'm not looking at you because I'm looking at my screen, if you want to ask any questions. So if it is okay, I'd like to share. Yes, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So very quick reminder, the Ithaca Green New Deal comes from a resolution that was adopted unanimously June 5th, 2019, and it had 2 basic goals that summarize all others, which is achieve carbon neutrality by 2030,
Right.
and to
I can't tell what view you have.
to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030 and climate justice in the community. Right now, we have been working for an entire year, and we have arrived to 12 different programs that we believe are essential to achieve our goals. What you see on top are the programs that we believe are necessary as a foundation for the infrastructure and economic change that the Ithaca Green New Deal is going to bring. I just want to highlight some of them, and these are from the foundational programs includes climate justice, democratic engagement, and workforce development. We believe that without properly addressing issues such as the intersection of environmental justice and social justice, we will not really achieve the goals of the Ithaca Green New Deal, but we cannot do it alone. So we need to find a new and better way of engaging the community. And also we are working on developing the workforce that we need in order to meet the demand that the Ithaca Green New Deal will create, through projects such as energy efficiency retrofitting and thermal load electrification that we refer to normally as the Electrification Program in the city of Ithaca, and I will elaborate in a second. But also how we are transforming our vehicular fleet in the city and how we are deploying more solar. The Electrification Program comes from the fact that about half the emissions in the city could be eliminated if we were to address buildings as the main source of emissions. And they are the main source of emissions because we use energy to heat our buildings. We use energy to heat our water, to dry our clothes, to cook. And because of that, we also bring energy from the electric grid. And all that in combination is about half of the emissions that we have in the city. So it just made sense that this could be the first project, even though most cities were shying away from it because it is a very complex, very complicated issue, because at the end of the day, we're talking about people's homes. We are addressing emissions by, in the design, in the construction and operations of these buildings. And the electrification program goes to the operation, how buildings perform. So we have 4 different programs that make up the comprehensive green building policy of the Ithaca Green New Deal. In June last year, we passed the Energy Code supplement that plans to eliminate fossil fuels in new construction and new additions in by 2026. And we also, in November, Common Council approved the electrification program that expects to retrofit and electrify every single building in the city, or at least those that need it, in order to reduce energy use in the city, but also eliminate emissions from energy use. We have been working with the city attorney's office and with the Department of Planning and Development to develop a benchmark law similar to what New York City and other cities have done in the country to determine a limit in the number of emissions that large commercial buildings can have, and that way have a benchmark that we can use to eventually incentivize building owners to move away from fossil fuels. And since the announcement of the electrification program, we have had about 5 different meetings with the White House that has a group that is addressing building performance, being the first city in the United States to mandate the reduction of emissions in existing buildings. We were invited to collaborate with the White House, and we co-founded the National Building Performance Standard Coalition. And right now, Ithaca is helping lead the charge in that sense. And I thought that was important to mention too. So we had the RFP in August last year. It was ratified in November by your vote, and a consortium of companies were selected. We normally talk about Block Power because Block Power is the leader of this consortium, but this consortium includes a number of organizations, including academic institutions, workforce development organizations, and some government offices that are partnering with Block Power to achieve this goal. Right now, since we voted to adopt the electrification program in the city, we have been involved in contract negotiations with Block Power. The city attorney has taken the lead in this process. I am happy to report that we are at the very, very end of this process. So we should have a contract ready for the mayor to sign perhaps before the end of the month. We are also on a listening tour, and this started in December. Block Power visited the city of Ithaca together with Alturos and Energetic Insurance. And that was the first time that they were engaged in the community and they were looking at the type of buildings that we have. They realized that the work was more complicated than what they had anticipated, thinking that our building stock is more related to upstate New York rather than downstate. But because of that, they started creating, Block Power is leading the creation of an advisory community advisory board that will help guide the work of Block Power. The people being selected are people who are volunteering, and with the assistance of the Sustainability Office, we are helping them identify the right people. But the listening tour goes farther than that. They are gathering people from faith communities, from minority groups, from disadvantaged communities, and we're gathering information and creating a frequently asked questions document that has been already shared with the mayor. It's in its initial stages, but the idea is to have a frequently asked questions document to share with everybody in the community. And that has already informed some of the material, some of the collateral that we are developing to share with the community. We're in the process of identifying the rules for building selection. And this has to do with what is the low-hanging fruit. This is a voluntary program. And also as a voluntary program, even those that participate can choose to only electrify part of their buildings, or maybe just do energy efficiency retrofitting, or maybe just install a heat pump. What we are doing is identify those buildings that, based on the energy profile, and I'll explain in a second what that means, we can foresee that there is a chance that we'll have some savings, and therefore we address these building owners and we invite them to have a proper energy assessment. And based on that energy assessment, we hope that we'll be able to propose solutions that would be agreeable to them, both financial solutions and technological solutions. We have been also very busy looking at climate justice, because when we talk about the Ithaca Green New Deal, we need to talk about also equity. And the idea of the electrification program is that we will address the needs of those disadvantaged communities. And right now, part of the guidelines we are developing for the implementation of the electrification program include the fact that we cannot be working on a building in a neighborhood that is not considered a disadvantaged community if we are not already working in a building that is part of a disadvantaged community. We want to make sure that we're always addressing the needs of them and we don't get distracted because there are other possibilities. We also have been busy with workforce development. As you know, you approved the request for a grant to fund the Green Jobs Corridor that brings together 5 different cities in upstate New York. We have been working with the utility company because if we electrify the entire city, there's going to be an increase in the demand for electricity. And I am very happy to report that the conversations and negotiations with NYSEG on behalf of the city led to NYSEG and the parent company Avangrid to make a commitment to invest initially at least $60 million with the potential of being $100 million in addressing the needs to upgrade some substations, particularly those serving West Hill and South Hill. And finally, we are developing an outreach program that is going to have a component of only digital, trying to use social media, using websites, where people will get all the information that they need for the electrification program, but also where people will be able to register either to ask questions or to participate in the program as a whole. We're also going to identify locations in the city like Finger Lakes Reuse, for example, Southside Community Center, where we can have information, where we can actually leave literature for people to understand more about the electrification program and where people could learn how to participate. We have had conversations with other organizations, for example, local financial institutions, the credit unions, because we believe that people go to the post office, go to the bank, and go to the supermarket. So if we were to educate people working in these places on what the electrification program is doing, they'll be able to share some of this information with people visiting. So very quickly, I just want to show you this image. This is something that we have been working with Cornell University for the past 6 months. This is a snapshot from the Environmental Systems Lab. This is something that NYSERDA, Park Foundation, Siemens, Cornell University, and the city of Ithaca have been involved in. And what you see is the energy profile for every building in the city. If you give us an address, we can tell you more or less what the energy profile is for each one of these buildings. What you see in gray, those are commercial buildings. Everything else is residential buildings. What you see in red are those that we estimate because of the age of the building, because the materials, the codes that were in place when these buildings were built, the orientation that they have, because they haven't reported any upgrades. We believe that they may be primed for retrofitting. And those that you see in green are those that actually are already either electrified or retrofitted. This is a machine learning system that Cornell University developed, and those guys are honestly genius. They really know what they're doing. And the more real information, as we learn from this program, we enter into the system, it's going to be more accurate. So we're going to be able to select buildings much easier. The next parameter to see which buildings we tackle is whether we can actually identify the building owner and reach out to them, because some of them live outside the country and it's going to take slightly longer for us to reach out to them. We have also talked to Cornell University and Ithaca College with the intention of having them help us identify the landlords that work with them to see if we can have them participate in this program, so we can address those properties that for the most part are rented to students that are not necessarily up to code. And just very quickly, just a reminder, this is the Green Jobs Corridor. We are waiting for a decision still from the federal government, but this is what we created. We created a region where Elmira, Binghamton, Syracuse, and Rochester, and in total 2.7 million people in the southern tier, central New York, and Finger Lakes could participate in a unified workforce development program, where initially Ithaca is the prime market for job opportunity once we start the electrification program. Through on-the-job training and apprenticeship programs, we could help eventually develop the workforce in Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton, and Elmira by having them learn on the job while they help us with electrification. So this is the update, but I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point.
Luis, thanks very much for that report. Very complete, lot of information. Did I hear you say either tonight or in an earlier meeting that in the city of Ithaca, there's a total of 6,000 buildings?
Yes, it is a little bit more than 6,000 buildings. And you can estimate that 70% are residential, 30% are commercial. And of those 70% that are residential, 70% are rentals, and 30% are building owners living in their own building.
And a question from Patrick, would you be able to send your presentation to council? And it will be part of our committee agenda, our minutes in the future, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Other questions for Luis? Rob, Gerhard, I see your hand.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Luis. This is, as always, great information. Just a question about the map that you showed that the Cornell group is working on. Is that something that will be able to, I know the intent is to try to update it with more current information. Is that something that will have a mechanism to be able to provide that information? And is that something the public will contribute to, or how will that be managed?
Yeah, we are working with the GIS group, part of the DPW in the city. Ruth, she's helping us organize the data right now. And as people register to participate, the first thing that you need to do is to do a walkthrough, a level 1 energy assessment. And if there is a possibility of doing more, then we do an energy audit, a level 2 energy assessment, where we identify, what can be done in that particular building. We gather information that way. We can, we're working with a company based in Ithaca called MPEC that has helped us by giving us free license to a technology that allows to capture information from every appliance that we have in the building very quickly and feed it into a database. So as we continue to advance, we're gonna grow the database, and it's gonna be with the city. So it's gonna be part of GIS.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Phoebe, I see your hand.
You're on mute, Phoebe.
Okay, I'm on now. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My question is about, you said the outreach program will only be digital, but and my concern is many of the disadvantaged communities may not have digital access to digital. And you talked about the post office, supermarket, and banks may have this information. And my concern is for grassroots community organizations also having this information for communities that doesn't visit some of the places that you mentioned. So I'd like to know, are you working on ways of outreach to grassroots organizations to make sure that they have this information to give to many of the communities that are disadvantaged?
Yes, I probably misspoke. I'm sorry if that was interpretation. We are having both. We are doing, grassroots. We're actually working with a number of communities, with Building Bridges, Natural Leaders, Black Hands Universal, Southside Community Center. We're working with Unbroken Promises, and all of them are going to help us with the outreach. And I mentioned the post office, department stores, banks, just to mention a few, but we are identifying, the different places that people visit, so we can have actual physical information that people can take home and read. And then with Cornell Cooperative Extension, we have the energy navigators that will help us also, communicate information and gather potential volunteers that could be part of this. The intention is also to work with Common Council and have town hall meetings whenever possible to help educate people on all the possibilities. So no, we are working with all of these organizations. It's not only digital. We are doing everything that we can because we need to reach out to pretty much everybody, 6,000 buildings.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Thank
Hi,
you.
Luis. Thanks. Hi, Luis. Can you tell me a little bit? So you said you're working to develop a benchmark law to help incentivize owners to move away from fossil fuels. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. New York City had about 6 years ago a local law 97. And it is part of a very comprehensive set of green building policies. But this one was targeting, in the case of New York City, buildings over 25,000 square feet. And the idea was to identify emissions and then set a cap. And then eventually this cap is used to determine, whether buildings are emitting more emissions than what they should. And then New York City installed a fine that was 2 times the social cost of carbon for every ton of CO2 emissions that these buildings would produce. If you think about the real estate market in New York City, there is a lot of buildings over 25,000 square feet. But in the case of Ithaca, we've been working with the city attorney's office trying to identify whether we do with 15,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet, and we do it only for commercial buildings. And that way, by having this initial benchmark law, we first identify what are the emissions that we have, what are the targets that we can set, and what is the cap that we could impose on commercial properties, not residential. And the way it works in New York City is there is pressure in the real estate market to compete with each other and therefore be a cleaner building, because the benchmark has to be disclosed also. So if you make that, for example, we haven't got to that level of detail, but for example, if you were to have a benchmark law and then require a disclosure of this benchmark, then there would be natural market pressure for people to adopt measures to reduce emissions. So that is the intention. And right now we don't have anything complete. We have just been working on it right now sporadically, but we've been working on that.
Okay, so just to be clear, I think previously when we had discussed these types of incentives, it was really about creating, as you mentioned, a way to measure what buildings were emitting, what they should be emitting, and doing a public assessment that way. But you're proposing something to take it a little bit farther, where we pick a group of buildings, perhaps commercial only, and if they exceed that benchmark based on this data gathering that you have, they would be fined at 2 times the cost of carbon.
No. I mean, I just explained how it works in New York City.
Okay.
Right now, and what I would propose is that yeah, I mean, we identify a metric like that. The social cost of carbon is a good one, which right now is about $120 per ton of CO2, and you can find them if you want. I mean, the idea is to have first a year of participation of commercial buildings that could be over 15,000 square feet and provide information to the city. And this information could be like 20-30 district gathers already, which is energy consumption and water. And based on that, we can set a cap. We can set like, we're going to start, phasing out fossil fuels, and we're going to set a limit of X. And then that limit may go down. And as you exceed that, then you're going to have to pay a fine. That could be an option, or it could be simple to educate ourselves in terms of what our buildings are producing in terms of emissions. It's easy to estimate and even model, residential buildings, because the energy profile of all of us is very, very similar. We got up early, go to work, and do the same thing. Commercial buildings are different. They have different patterns and different energy uses. So based on that, we will identify what is the right thing to do for commercial buildings.
This question, perhaps related question, did come up. We did sponsor a town hall discussion in the 5th Ward that Luis came to, and that was very helpful. I would encourage, he suggested that other wards could do similarly. The question came up as to whether programs would be voluntary or mandated. And Luis has been very clear that in terms of residential concerns, we're talking voluntary. We're not at the point of looking at any mandates, any law for the city of Ithaca just yet. But this also will be an ongoing discussion, and I encourage each of us to work with our respective constituents to get additional information. I do see two more questions, and I am just being conscious of our time commitment tonight. So, Duxon, I'm not sure if you or George had your hand up first.
I think I did, but it doesn't matter. I'll just two quick comments. I second Rob's question about the map, like just a quick glance of what was on screen. I had some questions about, buildings that I know that almost certainly use large amounts of natural gas or green and whatnot. And I know it's early days, but just as someone who's in computer science and as such highly skeptical of machine learning, it'd be good to learn how that model works. The other thing was the 70% rental, the buildings. So one thing that former city planner Alex, I forget his last name, I feel terrible, but he had done this analysis that, this off-cited statistic that 70% of buildings are rentals was actually units. And so there's a difference between the buildings and the units within them. And so it may not be as, I'm not sure what that means for the efforts, but it is a huge factor that may affect one way or another how easy that effort is. And then lastly, it's a great idea to have more town halls. And the thing I get asked about the most, and I don't have the answers, are like what it looks like for the homeowner or the renter, like at a kind of a detailed financial level, particularly the homeowner, because they're the ones who will be paying for it. Or not pay for it, or taking advantage of the program, I should say. Do you know when we might know more of that?
Yeah, let me go in order. The machine learning tool, it really is a tool for us to inform, whether we can identify buildings that we could, address, and we still need to do an energy assessment to determine whether, there is any improvements that can be done, and then that information is entered into the system. Also, yeah, we were talking about units. Yeah, I think I misspoke because I was talking about buildings and then I switched to units. But yeah, it's 70% units. This information that we have from GIS, and now we have, I would say we have a very accurate description of the city statistically. And we do have the numbers. I mean, we know how this is going to work, but it's different for everybody. Because in some cases, we are working with the state government, and the state government provides a loan loss reserve to to serve as a loan guarantee for low income, for the low income bracket. And in that case, then the conditions would be one. And in others, if you are more closer to the median income or right to the median income in the bell curve, then the conditions will be different. So it really depends on the underwriting. We can talk about a spread in general, and that would be really dependent on the type of building and the type of tenant, not necessarily building owner.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. And George, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Thanks, Louise. I just want to start by saying we're real proud of you and the work you do. We feel like we've got a major league ball player on our team, so thank you. I have a question about workforce development. Can you give me just a brief sketch of where we're at in terms of local workforce development related to the Green New Deal?
Yeah, the local workforce development, we have met, and now this is being led by Cornell Cooperative Extension, by Aloya, that most of you know. And he's been working with Raquel Pinder, who's from Roots of Success, to introduce the program at TC3 and BOSES. This hasn't happened entirely. The intention is this to happen, but there are already training programs at TST BOSES for heat pump installation. There are new programs being developed at TC3. And also New Roots is also now implementing Roots of Success, giving kids in high school the opportunity to, after going through the Roots of Success program, determine if they want to go directly for a certification for, one of the 10 different areas that we're covering with Roots of Success, or if they want to go to a community college, or if they want to go, to college or somewhere else. But we are trying to give them an option. And right now there is a group that meets pretty much every Monday to talk about this, and be very happy if you wanted to come one day. I see that Rich John is here. He meets regularly with the group that Aloya and Karim from Get Your Green Back are leading. So I would say that we have made progress. A lot of the work has been done in preparation for when we have what we expect to be an exponential increase in demand for people to participate in retrofitting or electrification that touches on several trades.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you.
And thank you for what you said, George. That truly means a lot to me. And Laura, Ari unmuted earlier because he was going to comment, I think, on the local law thing. I don't know. Probably there is something to clarify, and I don't know if we have time.
Up to you, Laura. I did have.
Sorry, did you have any comment you wanted to make?
Sure. Just very briefly, I was just going to emphasize to Cynthia's question, and I think Luis pretty much said it, but just to be very clear, even within there was a discussion of voluntary versus mandated activities that properties could engage in. Even within the mandated category of potential actions that the city might mandate, the initial stage that would be brought to council would only be about mandating information reporting, about mandating that properties report their data usage so that the city can develop an accurate picture of the carbon footprints of those buildings beyond our current information. So I just wanted to emphasize that would be the first step. I'll keep it at that for now.
Thank you for that clarification. I do want to move on to our next presentation, but Phoebe, did you have a quick question?
Yes, very quick. I'll make it really quick. What I'd like to know, Luis, and thank you for all your hard work. It's really, really a blessing to our community. What my question is, do you have a breakdown of the nationalities who are joining these programs and training in these programs? Because it's really, really important to me that people of color really get in at the base. So do y'all have any type of breakdown of who's joining and who's participating in these new routes and cooperative extension and the navigators and things? And it's not important. It's important to me. So I'd just like to know, are we reaching those communities?
Yeah, it is very important to us. And the answer is very simple. It's 99% white ethnicity. And the part of the work that we're doing, we got some new information from the census and also from New York State. And now we know that, for example, the Latino population is the fastest growing, and it's growing at a rate that it is expected that in 10 years, it's going to be similar to other minority groups right now. We are also looking at how particularly the Black and Brown communities are not participating in workforce development programs. So we are, through the Latino Civic Association, Black Hands Universal, Southside, and Unbroken Promises, we're trying to reach out particularly to those communities. We're also working with Ty Lee on the reentry program, because part of what we're trying to do is to also offer for minorities specifically, but in general for anybody part of the reentry program to participate in this. So we are trying to be very comprehensive, and that's why climate justice is such an important thing for the Green New Deal.
One last thing is that I work with the reentry community and people who have loved ones incarcerated. So let's get a time to talk.
Yeah, thank you.
More conversations in the future, definitely. Okay, thank you, Luis, and thank you everyone for the really thoughtful questions. I'd like to move on now in our agenda to the East Hill Fire Station concept and timeline. We do have two draft resolutions that are for discussion only that are in the packet. But now I'll turn it over to Tom, Lisa, Nels, and Ari for that presentation. I'm not sure who will be going first.
Ari, would you like to give the introduction?
Sure, I can start briefly there. Yeah. As you can see on the screen right now, we are excited to share the potential for a relocation of the East Hill Fire Station to a new site at Elmwood and Dryden from the existing College Ave site. And it comes with a number of, we think, really positive opportunities for the city. For one, it enables the city to maintain its existing fire station on College Ave while acquiring the new parcels at Elmwood and Dryden and constructing the new station at that location prior to vacating the College Ave site. For another, it provides, we think, really excellent value to the city for the transaction. And it provides flexibility for the Common Council to go through the process that is in many ways beginning today around a determination of whether to make this move or not, because the opportunity that we're here discussing with you is indeed an opportunity, not an obligation, which is to say that the city has an option agreement that we have negotiated with a prospective purchaser of our existing College Ave site, under which we have a negotiated price they would pay us and negotiated new parcels at Elmwood and Dryden that they would also provide us with. And the city has between now and this fall to reach a determination about whether it would like to move forward with that transaction or not. If we were to move forward with that transaction, as you can see in the agenda packet, there's a as long as we got it done on time, a $5.1 million payment that would be made to the city, in addition to two parcels that themselves are worth millions of dollars combined. That would also be provided to the city. And then there'd be a timeline that I think Lisa and others will speak to in terms of how that process would play out. I think Lisa will also touch on the history that led here, but I will say it's been a long road to get to this point, and it's very exciting to actually have an opportunity for this, because the very blunt alternative that we should all keep in mind is to invest a sizable amount of money in renovating the existing fire station on College Ave, which is really probably not the best investment at this time. So that's at least a short thumbnail of why we're here and what we're talking about, and I'll let you go from there, Lisa.
So I did briefly describe in the memo the history of this project as you saw, and I provided the executive summary of the study for the current fire station, which was completed, I think, in 2015, concluding that there would be at least $1.5 million worth of renovations for the fire station in order to bring it up to standards for the mechanical systems. And so at that time, in 2015, and then again in 2018, as you heard Patrick refer to, we released a request for expression of interest to look at options. It appeared that due to rising, property values in College Town, the best option was to sell the property and relocate. And during the process of working with the consultants, with the respondents for the expression of interest, the city looked at 9 sites all over College Town, and all evaluated for size, location, ability to do response time, and this was the only site that really, in the end, met all the criteria. So that is a brief history, and certainly if Nels, Tom, or Ari have anything to add, please do. But we have some slides. Tom is going to take you through the proposal, the location, why we selected the site, what the facility will look like, And then Nels will talk about the financials, and then we can look at the schedule. So I will advance the slides, and Tom, you can go ahead.
So as we start this process, which really started back in 2013, 2014, members of the city planning department, as well as planners from Cornell University, were having meetings about development in College Town. There was a lot of interest in, what the future of College Town would look like. And one of the things that was identified early on was the fire station and its location. And it was believed that this would be a good site for redevelopment, which at the time, in context, we didn't have any thought on, and I say we as the city, I don't think we really knew what College Town was going to look like in 2020 or 2021 or 2022. And obviously, there's a lot of development that's been going on in the last 6 years, 7 years. And the density in College Town has become greater. The traffic and the pedestrians are going to create more challenges for the fire department to operate out of its current location at 309 College Ave. Change is hard. I know within the organization, a lot of people are asking, like, why should we move? It's a really good location. But as time has shown us right now, we're starting to see that the development is going to make it a very crowded place for us to operate. But even going back 2013, 2014, the greatest challenge for us was trying to find a location where we could relocate the fire station. We looked at several locations throughout East Hill. Most all of them were in the city. A couple of them were just out into the town. A lot of the locations were provided by Cornell University as property that they had control over. We looked at several of those sites. Some of them were just not feasible because of their location, whether it's in the neighborhoods or operationally, it just put us too far away from the core of the East Hill area, which is our primary response area for that station. That station also is a secondary response or secondary due station for the north end. So we certainly didn't want to get it too far away from the downtown core of the north end. So we looked at many locations, and even through the RFEI in 2018, we asked developers to provide us some locations. And I think even 2018, we had no locations that were actually offered. I think there were 3 proposals. Lisa, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 3 proposals in 2018, and none of them, they all offered solutions for the fire station, but nobody could provide us a location, which brought us to the 2020 RFEI, where we had the conversation of saying, okay, we need to have help finding a location for where to build a fire station. And through a conversation, through an executive session, a common council, one of the questions that came up is, well, what options are there? Building on the existing location, building above it, and or building on a new site. So we did the RFEI in 2020 and had 2 proposals that we considered. And I think it was fair to say that when we came back to Common Council to talk about all the aspects of the projects, this was the one that was preferred. Primarily, one is the location that was proposed fit the need for the fire department operationally. But as important is that we could still operate out of the existing fire station while we actually developed a new site. And I think financially, I think there was a lot of positives financially for this site for us to move forward on it. So that's where we're at. Operationally, we feel that this location works very well for the fire department. And we've done a lot of studying of all the locations about response times and travel distance. And this fits just about every piece of criteria that we were looking at for the last 8 years as far as the location. So you want to go ahead and flip through the slides, Lisa? One of the things we did. This is a map just to tell you how much detail we got into. We looked at our responses. This is data from 2016, where we said, okay, where are most of our calls? Where are we going to? And this is a scatter map of primarily of where the apparatus that comes out of that station responds to. And as you see, it's primarily clustered right around the center of College Town, but you see that we travel throughout different parts of the district. The dots in the remote areas are indications of times when our units are very busy, and we might have that engine that comes out of that station respond to the west side of the city or the south side of the city or north to the northwest. But the majority of the calls are still centralized and located in the College Town area. You can go to the next slide. These are the two, oops, yeah, there you go. Those are the two parcels, 403 Elmwood and 408 Dryden Road, which are proposed in the option agreement. When we had identified these as site, we engaged with Mitchell Associates to do, we had already done some programming analysis of what the fire station needed is fire size and space, and Mitchell came up with a floor plan for a two-story fire station. Mitchell Associates, which is out of Voorheesville, New York, out near Albany, their specialty is fire stations. In fact, that's just about all they build is fire stations. They're the architect of the Cuba Heights fire stations, and dozens, if not hundreds of fire stations throughout the Northeast they designed. So we gave Mitchell Associates the College Town design guidelines, and we sent them pictures of what the neighborhood looked like, and we asked them to come up with a design that would fit within the neighborhood and within the character and to work within this lot. So Mitchell proposed a two-story building. Actually, it has a half-height entrance in the rear. It'll hold two pieces of a fire apparatus, a ladder truck, and an engine. It will house up to 6 firefighters. We built it bigger than we currently need because we are anticipating we're going to be doing some renovations on our other stations, and as we're doing work, things like electrification and energy efficiency, some of these stations we're going to have to vacate, so we need to move our firefighters to different places. So we've actually built this so that we can use it as surge space. So we've got more spaces for firefighters to be in the station than would normally be there. Typically, we have 2 or 3 firefighters in the station. We've designed it so it can have twice that number if in the event we have to close or relocate another station for other matters. So we built it and there's also future usage as far as what happens, next 30 or 40 years. As the community grows, the needs for fire service may increase, and we may actually need to put permanent staff in here to double its footprint. So we built that. We had that designed in the station with understanding for current needs and for future growth. You can go ahead and do the next slide. As I said, this is a 2-story station. We do have, resting quarters for the 6 firefighters. We have workout area. We did put some office space in here. One thing that we thought of is, as East Hill is growing and expanding, we want to make sure we had offices that either a fire inspector or building inspector could actually locate up here and work out of this office, save having to commute from downtown to East Hill. Again, we're trying to look at what the future usage of the station could be. So we built some office space in it to be able to accommodate that. We also have a classroom space here, but it's more of a multi-use space. One of the things we want to keep in mind is for emergency management purposes, if there was a major I call environmental event like flooding or something that would make it so that we couldn't provide emergency services or coordination or command and control from the downtown area. We have this room that could be converted to emergency operations center if needed, and other uses for that space. Go to the next slide. This is just a layout of estimated cost based on what we thought we were going to be looking at for total cost. One of the challenges we're trying to look at is what things are going to be and are going to come our way in the next year or so. Certainly, when we went through to designing this building, we've certainly had in mind that this is going to be a total electric fire station, but also we want to make sure that we have all the infrastructure that as we migrate towards electric fire apparatus, even if it's hybrid, it's going to need support. And using some information that was provided us by TCAP, we've even accommodated some of the infrastructure costs that we're going to need to support electric fire apparatus charging within the fire station itself. So this just
Tom,
go ahead.
Does it make sense for Nels to walk us through these numbers?
Yeah, we can have him do that. I was just trying to go through the slides. So I'm just trying to give you an outline, just what we've considered as far as in the fire stations, and that it's all inclusive. So we have everything as far as meeting the requirements for the new Green Deal. We're planning on that within the design of the station. But Nels can talk about the financials.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think it's important to note that these numbers were based on the designs that Mitchell prepared and were then developed by a local construction company. So they're better than initial architectural estimates. Having said that, cost of construction is escalating relatively rapidly in recent years. So these were the numbers that were developed a year and a half ago, but we have increased them by 6% in anticipation of escalation for construction start in 2023 under this scenario. So about a $9 million construction, and the sources of funds are really two major sources here beyond some city capital funding. One is the Empire State Development Grant. That was a grant the city applied for and received, I think about 8 years ago. And that money is still available to the city. We've checked on that. And the goal of that funding was to revitalize the Collegetown area, and particularly redeveloping the fire station for redevelopment. So that money is not funding that can go to other uses. It's strictly limited to redeveloping a fire station project. The sale proceeds, as Ari has mentioned, are per the negotiation on purchase price of $5.1 million. That and then you add those, subtract those to the cost of the project minus the sources of funds that I've identified there, and you got about $3 million gap. If you take into account that the city's going to need to invest $1.5 million in the existing facility to keep it operating, and it won't be energy efficient, but it will operate. If you subtract that, it's about a $1.5 million out-of-pocket cost at the end of the day to build a brand new fire station. So it's a pretty sound investment in terms of looking at it compared to other construction projects. It has a good return on it, I think, in that regard, state-of-the-art energy efficient facility. And then if you can go to the next slide, we take a look at the question of the redevelopment. Because the property is located on sites that are currently taxable, there would be some reduction in the assessed value and the resident and the taxes to the city as a result of the city acquiring those properties. But in return, the fire station project will be redeveloped. So we're looking at some of the assessments that we've seen in recent changes on Collegetown, using those as kind of metrics for this. We estimate that there's going to be about a $7 million increase in assessed value as a result of the project, which translates into almost $90,000 per year for the city, on an ongoing basis once the project is completed. So it's a nice positive return to the city in terms of property taxes. That's just the city portion, and also school and county taxes would receive increases as well. So that's a positive there. One thing to note in terms of the RFEI, and as the public comment was made earlier, is that there were two projects, but the alternative project to build on the site of the fire station and incorporate private development in the fire station had some shortcomings relative to this project. One was that it assumed that they would be able to build above the current zoning limit to achieve that project. They were looking for 6 levels of housing, and if the fire station takes the equivalent of 3 stories because of their high floor-to-floor ratio for the first floor, that would mean that there'd be a need to go well above the existing zoning limit in that area to achieve that project. And that was a very strong concern of the working group of assuming that a zoning variance or some sort of change in the zoning height would be feasible and workable. So that is one thing to consider about the alternative proposal that was a negative, I think. And so this project does not make any assumptions about changing the zoning. It's selling the property under the existing zoning conditions, which allow for a 6-story building. I think that, and then I think, Lisa, maybe you have the best grasp of the color-coded
Yes, the
schedule.
color-coded schedule. I can go over the schedule and then we can have questions. So we are here at the planning committee meeting with a presentation and overview. The next steps will be you have 2 resolutions in your packet for discussion this evening. Should we proceed with this, the next step will be to have a public hearing and consideration of those resolutions at the next planning committee meeting. And then a recommendation to council. So that would, be at the May planning committee meeting, come back with a public hearing and recommendation to council, and then for the June common council meeting, those 2 resolutions. And one is for authorizing the mayor to exercise the option agreement, and the other is authorizing the transfer of the property to the IORA to structure a development agreement. And so all this blue, all these actions in blue are the IRA structuring the development agreement, which would happen from May through June. And then it would come back, once there's a development agreement, it would come back to planning committee for review and approval, and then on to common council for review and approval. Once the development agreement has been approved, then it would move on to planning board for site plan review. And we expect that to last about till November, and then, moving straight into the design and bidding of the building through February, and construction with final, occupancy in mid 2024. So shall I stop sharing and open it up to questions?
Sure. It's really helpful to have this timeline, even in the tiny print. It is helpful to have the sense of what the next steps are. Before opening it to questions, I have one question, and that is that the city does receive some contribution from the town and for fire service. And I just wonder what impact that has on costs. Would the town be assisting with the construction costs?
Chief, would you like to speak to that, or would you prefer that I? You're welcome to.
Well, the current contract that we have with the town provides that if we have a capital project that exceeds a certain amount, and this one would, that we would go to the town and request their approval and to move forward with the project, but more so their agreement to pay for their share. I've only spoken with the town supervisor last week, and we haven't had a conversation about scheduling a meeting with the town. But under the normal circumstance on capital projects, the town would be responsible for 1/3 of those costs of those, and that's typically we bond that over. And Steve's not here. I think it's 25 or 30 years. So that cost would be spread out over a long period of time, which a town would pay a 1/3 of that cost, provided we still, we remain in a contractual arrangement with them over that period of time.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was part of this discussion. I know we've discussed that during budget time. Other questions? It's a lot of information. It's a plan that people have been thinking about, talking about for, as has been said, 8 years. So Cynthia, I see your hand.
Actually, now that Rob is going to jump on, part of my question was for Rob, so I think he's going to answer it. Does Cornell also make a contribution towards the fire station as well as the town?
So the so-called Cornell MOU, which is, Cornell doesn't characterize it as a payment in lieu of taxes, but it's a very similar to a payment in lieu of taxes that Cornell makes to the city. That agreement does provide for specifically a sizable portion of those payments, which are roughly $1.3 million, in that ballpark, per year that Cornell makes to the city right now. A sizable portion of those annual payments are targeted at fire service. But I don't believe that they're, I can double check, but I don't believe that they're targeted to a particular fire station.
No, they're not.
Yeah. So I suppose the short answer is no, Cornell has no direct payment that they would be making to this station under the current arrangements. Yeah.
Thank you. And my question was for Rob, just to get a sense of what the feedback was from residents in the neighborhood.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. We did have an opportunity. Timing of the agenda packet was perfect in that the neighborhood association, the Bryant Park Civic Association, had a virtual meeting on Thursday evening last week. It was sort of lightly attended, maybe 30 to 35 households in the community, and they had just been alerted to the agenda packet right before the meeting, so not everyone had had a chance to review it. But we were able to give people a quick summary of what's being proposed and made them aware of tonight's meeting and other opportunities where they'll have a chance to weigh in. The quick conversations that I heard from people, there was some concern about the current congestion of traffic along Dryden Road and how that may impact fire truck routes along there. I assured them that the chief and the other city staff have probably considered that, but that might be something that you'd like to address for anyone from the public who might be tuning in for that.
Yeah, we're already faced the challenges of getting through College Town with traffic congestion. As many of you are aware, the 300 block has been under a lot of pressure with construction in the last couple of years. So we've been navigating that tight area as it is. And we certainly are familiar with Dryden Road because we drive up Dryden Road, especially when we're going out towards the town of Ithaca and East Hill area. That's one of our major routes. So we're pretty familiar with the area. I don't think it's any different than any other part of this, the College Town area that we're driving through.
Thank you. Thanks. Did you have any other comments from that Bryant Park Association, Rob, to share?
Not yet, really, but we do expect to hear more. I hope that our neighborhood will, bring any concerns or questions they have to future meetings. But for now, I haven't heard much. Haven't seen much on our listserv, which is often pretty active. So maybe more will come.
Thank you. Thanks. Patrick.
Somewhat similar in the same vein as Rob, we have our College Town Neighborhood Council meeting next Tuesday, and we'll be talking about this as well, especially with a lot of the small local business owners up and down Dryden, to sort of ask them what impacts they might see, especially for restaurants and shipping companies that have trucks going up and down Dryden. But I will have more from them after next Tuesday.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for any of the individuals around the East Hill Fire Station? This will be coming back, as has been said, to planning next month. Ari, were you going to add something else?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add one very brief minor clarification, which may be useful, which is that I do want to emphasize that that, as described, the city went through an extensive search process for solutions to this potential relocation. And I do want to emphasize that while we were very pleased to have assistance from developers as part of their proposal for site acquisition of new sites, that the city by no means deferred to those developers in ultimately selecting plausible sites for the city. That the city did go through an extensive, very hands-on process of looking at potential sites, and that this is not something that's being thrust on the city by a developer by any means, but rather is a proactive step by the city to find a solution that works. So just to add that.
Patrick, did you have another question or comment?
Yeah, no, just really quickly, I'll have more from College Town Neighborhood Council folks on Tuesday, but at least my sincere thanks to Chief Parsons and Ari and all of your work. I guess in perspective for some folks, those of us who live in College Town, this project has been going on for a majority of our lifetimes. So a sincere thanks to all the hard work you guys have been putting into this for, at least from my perspective, a very long time.
Thank you. Thanks so much for all your work. I agree. Okay, we're ready to move on in our agenda. All right. So our next discussion will be on a draft concept report. And we have a few people who have been working on this. When we talk about a concern that has been challenging for the city to address and come to some remedy, the East Hill Fire Station is one. The challenge of the unhoused population and the encampments that have been popping up in especially a portion of the city has been of great concern to many, many residents, many homeowners, and many business owners. So I just want to thank those of you. I'll direct my thanks right now to Cynthia and George and Nels, who last year produced a report, proposed policy response to encampments on city property. And I know this group has been working really hard on this. So I'll turn it over to Nels to describe some of the highlights from that study you conducted.
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to have a few different speakers on this. So Carmen Guidi is here. You see him on the screen, and Chris Teitelbaum, who Chris is the regional director for St. John's Community Services, who manages the emergency shelter, and Carmen is the founder of Second Wind, and best known for Second Wind Cottages, and has worked extensively with the unhoused population and had some great success. Other members of the working group are listed on that memo, and I think several of them have joined the meeting. I see Jerry Dietz is here, and Rich John, and I think Michael Carpenter as well. So as the mayor mentioned, prior Mayor Myrick asked me to prepare some options for the Common Council to respond to encampments on city property. He received a number of complaints from property owners and from department heads and from departments, city staff who were looking for some direction on how should they react to encampments. And I started that work, and the mayor resigned, so we didn't get a chance to finish everything. But we've looked at researched the issue quite a bit, and realize there are a couple of key facts that should be kept in mind in this issue. And one is that we've had encampments in the city of Ithaca for at least 25 years. It has been a persistent problem. It has grown in the last 5 years. That's probably a result partially of increased rents and housing costs. Also, there is part of the issue anyway. We've also seen an increase in substance use issues and addiction in the community. Mental health also plays an important role in this. So when the point in time count is done every year, they try to measure information about the population of people who are homeless, who are sheltered and unsheltered, and it's about 25 get counted as unsheltered on an average year. There are always going to be cases where people are missed, but that's an average number. And 75% of those persons who are living unsheltered either have an addiction and or a mental health diagnosis. So there are, that is a real issue for this population. And the other thing to keep in mind is that there are people who are not allowed into the shelter system that is provided if you are sanctioned by that Department of Social Services, or if you're on the Registry of Sex Offenders. They don't have choices of being in the shelter during the non-cold weather months of the year. So it doesn't appear that there is that the population is going to dwindle in any significant way naturally. And secondly, our supply of permanent supportive housing and transitional housing, while increasing slightly, is still very modest compared to the population of people who present as homeless on an annual basis. So it's about 600 people present every year as homeless, and about 400 of them have successful outcomes. Another 100 or so are hard to track and don't know what happens. And the remaining 100 or 125 remain homeless. Is just kind of really raw numbers of kind of the issue. We have seen that the population of encampments has geographically spread as well. And that has raised the concern where it's become more visible. And people can see that there are a lot of negatives for the safety of people living in the encampments, as well as the health and well-being of neighbors as well. So this report is being developed is really asking the city to develop a policy on how it should approach encampments on city-owned property. And that's a position that has not really been clarified by the city ever, I guess. The city doesn't technically allow camping on any city property, but it also has not actively enforced that prohibition. So it's, generally speaking, across the country, where this is a problem many communities are facing, both in particularly the West Coast, but even smaller cities like Montpelier in Vermont and Burlington, of course, and Portland, Oregon, are all seeing the same issue. So we're not unique. And unfortunately, there's no silver bullet solution that people have found is the most successful approach. It's really unique in every community, and usually the truth is that every case of somebody being homeless is unique itself, as well as why they're homeless. It's not easy to categorize. And so the policy took a look at the issue and said there are 4 major ways that a community can approach unsheltered homeless. One is it can clear the encampments without any support for the residents. Secondly, there can be clearance with some strong support for assisting the residents. Third is a tacit acceptance approach. And fourth is a formal sanctioned encampment. Now, those are not, you can mix and match those, but those are kind of the 4 major categories of how you can approach the issue from a city perspective when it's on city property. Clearance with no support is not a very successful approach when it's been used in other communities, because those people just move to another location, or they move back to the same location 6 weeks later, and you have to start all over again because they don't have anywhere else to go. Clearance with support can have some success, where people find, if you can offer them opportunities for housing that work for them, and that they'll accept. So that can have some limited success. The tacit acceptance approach is essentially what the city has been doing. It's really been focusing on trying to have a harm reduction model and balancing that issue of the harm to the individual who's camping and if they're being asked to move to another location, versus the harm to the community. And I think the city has weighed in favor, by and large, at not trying to harm the individual who's camping, knowing that they're going through a rough patch in their life in most cases. And then the final one is formal sanctioned encampments, and that's kind of what we're here to discuss today. The formal encampments is very popular on the West Coast, and is particularly an important option when there aren't enough resources to provide an alternative place for people to live, provide housing. And when housing is very expensive in communities, this is an option that gets increasingly embraced by communities. It is, so that's kind of how we got to this question, was a query on what is the appropriate city policy. And this proposal coming forward is suggesting that there be a formal sanctioned encampment, developed in the city with city support, but also for support from volunteers, from the county is being asked to be a supportive of the player, as well as private philanthropy would play a role. So I think the next speaker was going to be Chris Teitelbaum, or was it going to be Carmen who's going to talk a little bit about the concept? Chris, are you still there? He's on the screen.
He just unmuted himself, so I'm hoping he will speak. Oh, there he is. Chris, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Now we cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Oh, we can see you.
We can see you, but we
Right.
can't hear you.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Oh. How are you
No, we
doing?
can't- we
Still
can't
can't
hear you,
hear you.
Chris.
We heard you a moment ago.
So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, okay. I have this very expensive headset that does not like to work, and I apologize. But thank you, Mayor Lewis and Common Council, and thank you, Nels, for that great introduction. I'm going to go over sort of first half of our proposal, and then I'm going to pass it off to Carmen, who's going to finish up. So the Ithaca dedicated encampment site, which is we call TIDES for short, would be a sanctioned campsite meant to provide sort of healthy, secure, and 24-hour staffed environment that serves with dignity up to 50 individuals at the time that they're experiencing temporary homelessness. I do want to add to this, and something to what Nels was saying, is that one of the great parts of this is that for a lot of the population that we're talking about, they've sort of been out in the cold for a long time, right? They've been outside, for lack of a better term, civilization for a long time. And so it's really about meeting the person where they're at, right? And starting to do work in an environment that they feel comfortable in. There are people who, because of trauma, undiagnosed or diagnosed mental issues, mental health concerns and so on, who aren't comfortable in motel rooms, they aren't comfortable in the shelter. They feel very paranoid, they feel boxed in, they just can't do it. They literally just cannot do it at first. And so we are talking about a space where for up to 50 individuals, we can meet them where they're at and begin doing that work, right, of reacclimating them to being in an environment with other people, right, in close proximity, and able to interact and come back into the community on both a social aspect and an economic aspect. TIDES provide a central location for shelter that promotes and protects people's safety. Nels spoke briefly about some of the ways in which this population is unsafe and is actually preyed upon to some degree. And that's another thing we want to sort of deal with, right? One of the things we see are people being preyed upon, not only their addictions, right? But stuff being stolen from them, fights, young women, older women being subjected to sexual abuse, mental and domestic abuse. These are things we really want to try to get a handle on and create a safe environment where people can hopefully escape this or take the first step to. And this is an idea, a temporary stop on the way to people finding permanent housing, right? In no way are we saying that we want to create an encampment where people stay the rest of their lives. This is really an idea of allowing people a space where they can come with dignity, receiving services that staff 24 hours a day, as they begin to make the work toward permanent housing, let that be housing in the private market or supportive housing of some sort with wraparound services. To get into some of the specifics, TIDES would provide a sanctioned campsite, which would meet New York State Department of Health requirements for campsites, 25 individual camping cabins. And so the idea being that someone may be there by themselves, they may be there as a couple. 24-hour on-site management. And that would include some type of security detail. A lot of the work we've done reaching out to successful groups that have done this to make it very clear that security detail that has a relationship with the population is really something that's made it work well for them. And this would be supported by our just kind of amazing and dedicated group of advocates who work with this population, right? So there'd be the management aspect of it, the day-to-day, and that would be supported from everyone from DSS, being able to visit people there, to our various religious-based NGO and private advocates who help this population. We also would like to provide central facilities where participants can use showers, toilets, a kitchen, have locked storage for things, and also have a social aspect. We've kind of described it as maybe a bandstand, but a place where people can meet, break bread together, communicate together. Again, as I talked to in the beginning, that aspect of really sort of re-civilizing people, if you'll excuse that, if you'll accept that term, right? Creating a space where people can get used to talking to each other, being social, and getting ready for coming back to Ithaca, coming back to the main population. I'm at that point gonna pass it off to Carmen. Carmen, are you here?
I am here. Can you, I can see you. Can you see me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everyone. So I'd like to thank Mayor Lewis and the council. It's been a long road getting this far for me. I've been at this a long time. It's funny because I remember meeting with Mayor Savante the weekend before he took office and saying, I want to help homeless people. And he kind of snickered a little bit. And then I remember shortly after we started Second Wind, he made the point to say that I meant what I said. So it's been a long time. So I'm excited about being here. I don't think we've ever been this close. I've been a part of a lot of working groups and a lot of task force, and they just seem to dead end. So with that said, our plan includes coordination with wraparound services such as case management, healthcare, recovery work, work readiness, government service access. This will be a low barrier entry site in compliance with individual engagement plans. So basically, like Chris said, meeting people where they're at. So I've got experience with this. When I developed Second Wind, I was asked by a lot of agencies in town, how have you been able to house this individual for so long? We haven't been able to house him. And what we do at Second Wind is we meet people where they're at, and we build relationships with people. As Chris mentioned, you've got a lot of people that are out there living outdoors that have had major trauma in their life. They need people. They need community. Let's face it. These people are our neighbors. They need us. We need them. They're part of our community. So we also will provide a central location for confidential spaces where those who seek support can meet with service providers. Also, this plan will allow for open and safe access for emergency responders, such you've heard about all the fires and things like that in the jungle or Southwest Park or whatever you want to call it. And this has gone on too long, I think. All along. Again, these people are part of our community. They're our neighbors. Why shouldn't they have access to the same response as everyone else? So this would allow for that. We're also taking into consideration the neighborhood, the neighbors. Everyone's heard of NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. And that's, again, on a human perspective, we all need to work together with this. And so we do take that into account with minimal impact to surrounding communities. So with that said, it's again bringing it into a human perspective, and that's really what it's about. And I know, listen, I know there's politics involved, right? I understand that. I've been on a lot of these working groups, and but it's time for a change. It really is. It's time for, I think, and I expect and I believe that the city will step up. I really do. Ithaca is known for caring for people, a welcoming community. So I expect and I encourage the city to do the right thing with our help. So I want to thank the working group and everyone here, and I'll turn it over, I think, is George next?
We had George next.
Yep.
George, are you there?
I thought I wasn't going to be saying anything tonight.
I can finish it, George, if you like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Let me
Yeah.
just very briefly say
oh.
that, because, you know, if politicians like to talk, yeah, this is the best time we've had, I think. We have financial support, and I know that's important to Laura, that the city doesn't get stuck with the bill, and I respect that. We've been working on this a long time. A number of people on this task force, not me, but a number of other people have really gotten their ducks in a row for the financial support and the service support. So yes, there's complications, and it's not an easy thing to figure out, but I think now is the time, really. I really think now is the time to do this.
Yeah, if I may jump in, it is really impressive that this group, these partners in our community, city and county, have come together to address this issue that has been a persistent issue. As Carmen has said, these people are part of our community. There are challenges to coming up with a solution, and we don't want to begin something that can't be sustained. I think that would be problematic, as well as problematic as it has been to address this issue of the unhoused. It would be a terrible thing if we moved quickly such that it would not be a sustained effort. So there are questions about cost, again, because I think all of us would want to see something put forward that is successful. And there would be cost of the 24/7 coverage, whose responsibility that rests with for recruiting and hiring, 24/7 management, for example. I know that the memo is very clear. And by the way, I just want to also clarify, and then I'll turn it over to others, that what we're doing tonight is talking about this as a concept and recognizing the incredibly good work, hard work that many of you have invested in this. This is not a voting item, but it is a necessary discussion to moving the concept forward. And that's what I hope we can arrive at tonight, is some consensus on moving the concept forward. But I don't know if there are any others from the working group, the task group, who want to talk, but I do see some council members who have hands raised. So what is your preference?
Rich, did you want to speak briefly about next steps that you envision? And Chris was willing to talk about the sites that we were considering.
Before that happens, could I just quickly ask a question? So I heard someone mention a memo. We didn't have that in the agenda packet. It notes it was sent under separate cover. Could somebody forward that to me?
It is in the amended agenda.
Got it. Okay, I'll find it there.
Positioned in the packet, I think. And Cynthia and I had this conversation right before we started the meeting. It's page 3 in the new agenda.
Okay, I'll find it. I'm looking at an older version, so that's the problem. Thanks.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for giving us some time on this issue. This has been a long process, and a lot of thought has gone into this. My task on the list of speakers was to just talk about next steps. And certainly we want to bring this issue to the county. I believe as a county legislator that the county has a role to play. And I've said that to you last fall, I believe, when I came to Common Council to talk about this same issue. This is a serious health issue. It's a crime issue. It's an environmental issue. If any of you have walked through the areas where the encampments are, there's crises that express themselves in all sorts of different dimensions. This is really, really urgent, especially in the spring when people are re-entering the camps and re-energizing them. You know, the winter really was the opportunity to do something about this, and we are late. So I urge you to think about this with some urgency. And in terms of next steps, I, for one, would very much like to hear this committee actually do reach some consensus and tell us, yes, we want to hear a proposal, a more detailed proposal on the idea of a sanctioned encampment. That would give us the ability to talk to the county in a meaningful way. Certainly the city, as the municipality with land use control power and the existence of the camps on city land, it's first a city issue. If we go and talk to the county in concept, we won't get anywhere. We really need the city to decide, yes, we want to work towards a policy, and this is one way we could possibly do that, and we want a proposal. If you tell us that, we will go do that work. So next steps, please, at least have the discussion and try to vote on this if you have the will. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, Rich, just to respond to you, this is a good discussion. There are a number of questions that we don't have the answer to. When you say this is first a city issue, I think this is a community issue. It is not a city issue. We can't solve it as a city. We can't solve it without input. And it's great that you have been working as part of the task group. We can't solve this as a city.
I agree, Laura, but nobody's asking the city to solve it alone. But I would suggest that the city has to be the leader here. You guys have to stand up on this first. And if you do, as I said in the fall, I will be your fiercest advocate with the county. But if you can't say you really want to work towards establishing a policy, we're not going to have really the base to stand on to talk to the county or to all of the different partners that are going to have to be brought into this. As you suggest, Laura, it's not just the city, but the city has to tell everybody, yeah, we're in, we want to do this, we want a different approach than the last decade. And this is one possible way we really want to see a proposal. If you do that, I think you're going to see a groundswell of support coming from lots of different directions. But without that statement, it's going to be very difficult to generate the energy that we need.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks. Phoebe, I see your hand.
Yes. I have a few things I'd like to say. For one, as a woman of color, understanding not in my backyard very well has been something we've dealt with for a very long time, right? And so I understand that concept. My concern is that it's been 25 years that these encampments has popped up, right? And so to understand right now, it's a big concern for because they're moving around. And that is, and thank you all for the amazing, awesome work that you've done on this. It really just captures my heart, right? Because I know what it's like to be on the outskirts, but I also know that some of these camps are where people want to be, right? So my concern too is that there are not a lot of people of color in those camps, for one. So have that been in conversation? Because there are people who are also, they may not be in encampments, but they're homeless and they're on the outskirts, right? So have that discussion arise and have the focus for if people of color, how, when you create these, if the city says, yes, we can do this formal sections and create encampments like the gentleman has, I forgot what you call them, but, and how are you going to make sure that we also remember that we have to be very clear about how we communicate and how we interact with that community, people of color? Because many of these encampments are not a lot of people of color, right? How do we talk more with DSS who are not sanctioning people to be allowed into shelters? Why aren't we not having a conversation about having other shelters in our community? But, those are some questions for me, but I think y'all did the work and it sounds really good to me. And if any time you have meetings, please invite me. I'd love to be there.
Did you want feedback on those questions?
Yeah, I think perhaps Chris and Carmen, you have some best feedback to that.
Yeah, so Mr. Brown, thanks for the question. I think they're great questions. You're correct. For the most part, the encampments are mainly populated by Caucasian, by white individuals. We have been talking, Richard Rivera and I have a very close relationship. We're talking about this stuff a lot. Both him and I have recognized the fact that we have a fairly, I think, undercounted, if not undocumented, houseless or really housing insecure Black population in Ithaca. I think we saw a lot of that recently, sort of on State Street around the location of the staff facility. So one of the things is we're always reaching out and engaging with individuals in the shelter program itself, right? Especially people of color. We have a high percentage of people of color in the shelter program. Unfortunately, higher than their equivalent percentage in the population of Ithaca would sort of mandate, but that's a different conversation. So we're always reaching out to them, right? And part of the idea of the encampments is to create a space that is not segregated like it is right now, right? So right now you have these encampments, and you're right, they're really white and they're not very welcoming to people of color. And we want an encampment site that is welcoming to anyone who feels the need to take advantage of that resource, to help them get on their way to permanent housing. Again, the goal being permanent housing of some sort at the end. So that's the conversation we're having. It's in the planning ideas. That's really important. It's really important outreach, because I think one thing that happens is that the more resources we put on the table, I'm hoping more people that need those resources will come out and say, "Hey, hi, I need help. Can you help me as well?" So these encampments have to be welcoming. Absolutely have to be welcoming. And to a point which I think you may raise, the management and the supervision of these encampments also has to reflect that population, right? So I don't think we'd be looking at an encampment that has all white management, all white security, right, and so on. I think we're very sensitive to those ideas as we're moving forward. Per your other conversation, I can't speak for DSS, and I don't actually know how much impact DSS would have with the sanctioned encampment, due to the fact that DSS is bound by certain codes and laws, right, which come from the state level. So I can't really speak to that, but we are thinking about in a very real way, in a very vigorous way, how this encampment idea can benefit vulnerable people of color in this community, and also, and I want to sort of stress this, vulnerable women of color and women in general, who right now many times are forced to be when they're housing insecure, many times are forced to stay in housing which is dangerous for them, right? And maybe with partners who are dangerous to them because they can't find other housing, right? And they can't go to the encampments right now because, like you said, one, it's not welcoming because it's mainly white, and two, it's just not safe, right? There's just not people there to help them. So I really appreciate you bringing those subjects up, and those are subjects that we are absolutely thinking about and expect to be held accountable to.
Thank you. Thank you, Phoebe, for the question, and Chris for that thoughtful response. And it's good to hear that discussion is part of the planning discussions. And I apologize, my internet is not secure, is not stable, so I dropped out for a few moments from the meeting. Cynthia.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Phoebe, for your offer to help and be part of this effort. We definitely will welcome you. I warn you, we meet every week. So happy to have your participation. I just did want to just outline next steps. We understand that we will come back to you to BEDC next month. And in the meantime, our group will take the show on the road and reach out to our county partners. I'm generally hearing some support, even though we don't actually have an official nod in a particular direction, but at least I think now our group feels more confident in actually reaching out to service providers, to nonprofits, to other partnering organizations to say, we've got this together. We'd like to keep this momentum going. We hope that you will be a part of this. And when we come back next month, to be able to come in with a more fully flushed out idea as much as we can in the next few weeks. Does that sound right to you, Laura?
Yeah, I'll jump in. And Cynthia, you know, because you were part of a discussion yesterday, one of the greatest challenges is, and this speaks to a point that Rich has made too, and others, is identifying a location. If what is desirable for a sanctioned encampment is a 3.5 to 4 acre location, which is what I've been hearing, identifying a site that also has infrastructure, has the amenities that, you know, I understand that the city does have land, and while there may be great interest in moving forward with land being provided, there is a question that in some ways is a more challenging question, and that is the infrastructure, water and sewer connections. So that's another one of the major questions and issues that we would have to look at further. But knowing that there is county support, Rich, you've been asking for this issue to be addressed for a long time. Many people have been asking that this issue be addressed. There are multiple questions that I hope we can move forward on getting some answers to, in terms of real commitment. For example, from the county, Carmen, I understand that you have made commitment, and I do know from Cynthia and George that this task group has been working really diligently and weekly on this. So your work and your efforts are much appreciated. Chris, did you have another comment or question?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to make one last comment, and I won't go into the actual sites because I think people can read that, and it appears that we are, I'm assuming, running out of time. I did just want to kind of leave the group with what I think is a very important piece of information that I want to reiterate, in that there are many people in the encampments right now. This is incredibly important. There are many people in the encampments right now who are not suitable due to trauma or other issues for coming into enclosed spaces. If we're talking about solving homelessness in the long run, right, about getting these individuals into a place where they have housing, they have to be first met where they're at, or close to where they're at, or else the work can't be done. You cannot seriously do the work of moving them from point A to point B in a realistic manner if you cannot figure out a way to meet them at point A, or a facsimile of point A, of point A. That's why this encampment idea is so important, right? Because there are some people who would, it's quite sad, will literally stay out in the freezing cold because they just cannot wrap themselves around the idea of coming into shelter, right? And so I need everyone on this council, and I appreciate your time, I need everyone to really take that home and think about that, right? If we're talking about meeting people, we have to find a way to meet them and create the workspace where they're at or where they feel safest. And I really appreciate everyone's time. I just felt like I really need to reiterate that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. And that's really part of what's behind the comment I made about wanting something to move forward with the greatest opportunity for success. We don't want to start something that jumps from point A to point B without understanding all the factions, all the factors involved in getting from A to A.1, A.2 in order to get us to B. We are running out of time, and I know that this is a topic that will come back to PEDC, and hopefully when we come back to PEDC in May, there will be some more information, answers to questions that have been raised. And we'll share those questions. I think Cynthia and George have a good idea of what those questions are. They were involved in discussions yesterday. So Phoebe, did you have one more question to put forward on this issue?
No, I wanted to thank Chris for that, because I think we have to be knowledgeable that some people choose to be in the encampments because they're not ready to move to that next stage. So they need to be prepared. So thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Is there any member of the PEDC who would like to vocally express support for this concept and having us move forward with gaining more information on this as a conceptual approach to dealing with unhoused? I'm supportive of this moving forward in concept. I see Rob Gerhardt shaking his head, and Patrick and Phoebe has expressed a thumbs up. Did I miss anyone? Cynthia?
And
yes,
as the chair of this working group, I definitely support it. So
yes.
I'm glad to hear that, and thank everybody for your
Okay.
expression of support.
Thank you, everyone, for your work on this really challenging and complex issue. If it could be solved easily, we would have done it before. Thank you. Okay, as we move on in our agenda tonight, we do have an action item, and this is an action item that came before PEDC last month. PEDC moved forward with it, but then there was additional information that was forthcoming just days after. Was it days after PEDC or days after the Common Council meeting? So it made sense to come back to committee so that we were clear in what we would be taking forward to Common Council. So thank you for the pivoting, the flexibility, and I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Yeah, as Mary Lewis mentioned, this came to committee last month, and actually 2 days prior, the state had released their own draft criteria for disadvantaged communities, which is the language that they're using. And we had an opportunity to better digest that and better understand sort of not just the criteria that they were using, but the implementation of that criteria, which led us to think a little bit more differently about the resolution that we had brought forward in March. So in your agenda packet, you have a little bit more on the state's definition, and just for a little bit of context, the state uses 2 different sets of criteria, and you can qualify under one or strongly under both. And it's the one that I think is most important as we apply it to Ithaca is the population characteristics and health vulnerabilities, which is the last page, at least in reference to this resolution in the agenda. It's 2 tables, the blue and the red table. So essentially the big differences between what we suggested last month and this month is we have eliminated redundancies from the state and the city, and we have increased the threshold for qualifying as a climate justice household from 2 of those criteria to 3, and have mentioned that a household can qualify under the state criteria or those 3 criteria at the city level. And I realized just 30 minutes before this meeting that there may have been a lack of clarity around how we apply the state criteria. The state does use sort of weighted ranking to qualify census tracts. And if you actually look at the draft map that they released for Tompkins County, you'd see that the only areas that qualify as disadvantaged communities in Tompkins County is Cayuga Heights. So we would like to massage that a little bit, one, by providing our own criteria as well, but also if you look at that blue table that's titled Population Characteristics and Health Vulnerabilities, you'll see that a number of those criteria start with percent, for example. So in our interpretation of that, we would actually strike the percent because we're looking at an individual household basis of dispersed populations rather than by census tract. So if a household makes less than 80% of the area median income, for example, to take one right from that table, then that household would qualify. I'm not sure what else is helpful.
Yes, thank you. That is helpful. It's helpful to have the redundancies eliminated and the language clarified. So we will be looking for a vote from this committee to move this forward once again. It was pulled from the Common Council agenda because there was a desire to clarify the language. Does anyone have questions about this tonight? Cynthia.
I'm looking in the resolution in the packet, and it looks like the same resolution as last time. I do see that there are some comments for changes that were not incorporated. So is there a revised version that you were hoping that we would include, or is it just some clarifying language that we can add here that you'd like us to add to the resolution?
Sure. I apologize. That was a careless oversight. The comments that are in there, I thought that I had resolved them all before downloading it from Microsoft Online, but it looks like there were a couple that snuck away from me. This is the correct version. It's an updated version. So in the previous resolution, there were a number more bullet points under the criteria, but otherwise it should look basically the same, other than there's that mention of it needs to meet either the state documented criteria or at least 3 of the following. And the other comment that's in there is also addressed and was an internal comment for Luis and I. But so if I may ask you all to ignore those big red boxes, I would appreciate it.
Does that answer your question, Cynthia?
Yeah, I think so.
Should we resubmit without those comments and in a cleaner format?
If the text is correct as is, there's no need to resubmit. In my view, of course, it's up to Laura.
And I also want to add that we pulled it from Common Council because of the the state definition and also what we refer to as the Cynthia effect. We had a conversation with Cynthia after the meeting with Planning Committee, and she identified some weaknesses in what we were proposing. So what we did to address those were to merge it somehow with the state definition, and then taking some of the comments that Cynthia made, and that honestly were actually spot on. Like really, I think when we took the definition through an example and the definition failed, I think that was telling. We needed to fix this. So thank you for that, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Sorry. I now have a term.
So we have to have a committee vote on forwarding this to council. for a vote. And I do want to make sure that what we are forwarding is the correct version of the resolution. So I think, Rebecca, you've commented on those edits. And we'll just make sure if there is a vote to send it on to council that there's a clean copy in the council packet. Okay.
Of course, my apologies again for that oversight.
No worries, no worries. Any other comments or questions before voting on this?
I'd like to move it. I think we need to move it first.
Yeah, I understand that. So Cynthia has moved. Is there a second? Rob, thank you. We've had discussion. All those in favor of moving this on to council for a vote? That looks unanimous. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for commenting and for revising and editing as needed. Okay, we now have a few discussion items to move on to. And the first is on a topic that we began discussing again last month. We had some questions and there is additional information now. So let's turn it over to Megan and Jamie and Tom.
Laura, actually, Tom isn't with us tonight, so I'll give the introduction. And just a clarification on the agenda, all of the items are sub items for the short-term rental. So
that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's a little confusing now that I'm thinking of it. So thank you for your time tonight. So as we are undertaking this issue and trying to develop policy or think about policy, our first step is really to help just to basically understand the conditions on the ground now. What exists? How many short-term rentals are there? How are rentals regulated? What does the zoning code, housing code say about rentals? And so we're going to continue that conversation tonight about trying to paint a picture of what really is happening on the ground. So to that end, we have some new data which we can talk about after Tom and Megan and Jamie give their presentations, but we wanted you to understand short-term rentals from both a zoning code perspective and a housing code perspective, because it differs. So thinking that background is important as we have the discussion on how to regulate. So, and again, to that end, we have Megan Wilson, our zoning administrator, and Jamie Gatch, our supervisor of housing code. So Megan, why don't you go first and explain the zoning, and then Jamie can talk about housing code.
Hi, everyone. So as Lisa noted, there's two pieces, at least right now, that for regulating short-term rentals, the zoning and the housing code, and being in compliance with one does not put you in compliance with the other. So that is important to know as you go forward. So right now, our code, our zoning ordinance, to be very clear, does not make a distinction between the rental of a full unit between a short-term basis or a long-term basis. So the zoning itself does not say that you can rent a single family home or even a two-family home for a long-term basis, but not for a short-term rental. So as long, we do not allow rental by room in, say, the R1 or the R2 district, because that brings you closer to the bed and breakfast definition, which would require a special permit. However, if someone is deciding to rent the whole unit, they are currently permitted to do that. They must maintain, getting kind of over towards what Jamie's going to talk about, a certificate of compliance, go through housing inspections, and remit the required occupancy taxes. and also not exceed the maximum occupancy under zoning or housing code, which are sometimes two different things. So that's in the R1 and the R2. Again, that's an entire unit. If you're interested in renting by, individual rooms, you need to seek a special permit for bed and breakfast, a home or bed and breakfast inn, which is not in the R1, that's in the R2. But again, the full unit, we don't make a distinction between long-term and short-term rentals. In the R3 district, where we do allow multiple dwellings, it can be rented by a room. So for example, we do have some large single unit multiple dwellings. So that means a single unit that houses 4 or more unrelated people, which is allowed in the R3. A lot of them fall into that definition of kind of a boarding house or a rooming house, where the room is rented, they have shared common space, and that's allowed in the R3, but not in the R1 and the R2. Because again, renting it by the room either brings you closer to that rooming or boarding house definition of a multiple dwelling, or in the R2, the bed and breakfast by special permit. So right now, that is how we, that's what we have to enforce. If we find out that someone is renting say a large single family home by the room in the R1, that's not permitted, but they can rent the entire house, or if it's a 2-unit structure, either of the 2 units, provided that they meet the other requirements that Jamie's going to talk a little bit about. Cynthia, I saw your hand.
So
Hey,
I don't know if you want me to wait.
no, go ahead. That's fine.
So the way I understood it is that we have a definition under 325-3, definition for dwelling multiple. A dwelling or building with 1 or more sleeping rooms other than a 1 or 2 family dwelling used or occupied by a permanent or transient paying guest or tenant. So
yeah,
I thought that in that case, it does distinguish, because an R1 and R2 does not allow transient guests, because that would turn it into a multiple dwelling.
So that's not true, because this specifically excludes the 1 family or the 2 family dwellings. So then when you go up to the 1 and 2 family dwelling question, it's silent on the issue of transient or temporary paying guests, so or renters. So in that case, so this definition that you referred, it's sub-bullet 4 under multiple family, that's kind of the traditional definition of a rooming or boarding house, which is allowed as of right in all R3 districts in higher density or higher level of use. But in terms of if someone is to rent an entire single family home or an entire unit within a 2-family dwelling, our code is silent on whether it's a short-term or long-term use. So here it's specifically excluded to allow it, but the 1 and 2 family, it's silent. So it doesn't say specifically that it is prohibited or define this, what we typically think of a single family or 2-family dwelling. It doesn't define it as a long-term rental being allowed, but not a short-term.
Okay, I took this interpretation directly from our previous zoning administrator, who identified it as transient, and therefore, that there is a definition. If it's less than 30 days, it's a transient use.
So,
and then if a place is just used for just temporary overnight guests, it could be classified as a hotel. So, if that's the sole purpose. So there does seem to be a variation in interpretation of what is allowable, because I think, with this new introduction, I don't know, it just seems to be changing depending on who's sitting in what seat, which is very confusing, and definitely we need more clarity so that doesn't happen.
So, and I've spoken with him previously about that. And in terms of his understanding of the zoning, we share a similar understanding of zoning. Again, there's 2 components that go to this. There's the zoning code and then the housing or building code. And building and housing, as Jamie's going to get into in a minute, does describe transient more clearly than our zoning ordinance does. And I think that from what I've read through of the previous zoning administrator's email, he's referring to that section, which I think maybe it would help if Jamie gave an overview of that, and then we could come back.
Okay.
Thanks. Go ahead, Jamie.
Okay, so I won't interject opinion. I will just state a few facts. Any residential dwelling unit or room in the city of Ithaca to be rented requires a certificate of compliance from our department. And that involves a basic life safety housing inspection. Also, we've had a few discussions about this and where we go from here to even wrap our heads around it. And one of the things is if you take a single family home and you want to use it for a short-term rental, which is obviously transient, it's less than 30 days, and we do have that definition in zoning, then you would have to pull a building permit for a change of use, because now it's not a private residence or even a single dwelling rental unit that's permanently or primarily permanent in nature, meaning 30 days or more on the leases that are signed. It's a business use and it has to meet New York State Building Code. So that, I'll just leave it at that. That's one thing to consider. We've struggled with, enforcing anything with short-term rentals, because the only time we even hear about them is when there's a complaint. I've had people that weren't happy with their unit that they rented for the weekend call me and offer, the ad on Zillow or Airbnb where the person was renting out rooms without compliance. They didn't have a certificate of compliance. And, so I would contact that property owner and let them know what was required as a minimum, and that would be a certificate of compliance, which is enforceable by our local ordinance. So that's frustrating. I guess I'll just open it to questions at this point.
Sorry, Patrick.
Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. I guess I sort of just have a question about the certificates of compliance, both in the short-term rental sense, but also I know there's such a massive lack of enforcement in college towns specifically. And, I know the Cornell off-campus housing tries to do their best to get as many of those properties, and like they authenticate and say, oh, we know these ones have, and we've checked in every year. But for most apartments, at least, I have friends that off college town. I go and it's like, oh yeah, it's supposed to be in your cabinet. Let's check. Nope, it's not here. So I guess I'm curious if you have any thoughts about throughout certificates of compliance, period, what are ways we can start to either put teeth on them, ways we can start to enforce them? Because, those are certificates that it's safe to live there. Like that seems like
there's a plethora of variables involved in this whole thing, this whole discussion, which I could go on and on about. I wouldn't even touch on lack of resources. What I will tell you is the pandemic, a previous director or supervisor of code enforcement, Mike Nikodovich, and I talked about this when it was first coming in 2019 into 2020, and then the pause, that this was going to create a tsunami of backlog. That coupled with a few housing inspectors retiring, a couple code inspectors retiring, and not being able to fill those positions. As the housing code supervisor, I was doing College Town and my other responsibilities. And obviously I couldn't do that in a full capacity. It was very overwhelming. We were still trying to find a replacement code inspector during that period. We had property owners who now say, we heard the building department wasn't doing inspections. I never missed a day during the whole pandemic. I was out there doing inspections when my employees were furloughed. I got them back within weeks, showing the logistics of the revenue that was being lost and the service that we promised the community for housing inspections. And so we got back 2/3 capacity and moved forward doing the best we could. Some people took advantage of that. There were times when there were so many closings that we couldn't even close in time for the, or inspect in time for transferable certificates for the closing. So we made concessions. We also, not knowing how safe or unsafe it was to go into buildings, we had to impose safety, guidelines for the property management groups. And a lot of the students didn't want us in there. They were afraid that we might bring COVID into their unit, and they had every right. When they sign that lease, they have just as much legal authority as the owner of the building, and they can deny us access. Our inspections, we have to gain voluntary compliance. At any point, they can deny us access. So what that means is we would overwhelm the courts seeking search warrants to do the inspections. And there's a lot of requirements, like you have to prove there's a public health safety issue, or maybe the building has structural integrity issues, before the judge will grant those, because they're protected by the Fourth Amendment. I mean, that's the bottom line. When you get to, that's single, two family mostly. When you get to 3 units or more, there's a little more state mandate there. Article 18 of executive law, it has more teeth, so you still need the voluntary compliance as a whole. You need every tenant in every unit to grant us, access to do our inspections. So that was a big setback, and we still haven't recovered from it, and we probably still won't for another couple of years. I will be actively working with Lisa and Rob Feldewalt and Common Council to try to get a few more housing inspectors. But right now, I mean, we've hired a few code inspectors. The city is growing, and it's such a rate that, people don't think about all these big 13-story buildings we're putting up that are residential. We have to load all that into our database. We have to do periodic inspections. Anything apartment buildings, 3 years. Fraternity sororities are annual. Single, two family are every 5 years. And I can tell you, in the last 2 years, I have a stack. As a matter of fact, I just received another 28 sales. The number of sales in the city of Ithaca are staggering. It is consuming my time because there's so much time I have to put forth to get the information, contact information, operating agreements for LLCs to know who it is that owns this building. And there are protections for those LLCs, make it more difficult for us to get that information.
Yeah, if I could just interject, I think Patrick's question is a really good one, and it gets at the need for inspections and the certificate of compliance that is required. But Jamie, you're pointing to the incredible impact the pandemic has had and the staffing challenges to be able to do the work. I know that there has been an effort, there has been some hiring that Lisa has reported on recently. So that is something that we will want to hear more about in the future. I want to make sure that we're talking about the short-term rental information that's been provided in the memo, and some of the maps that are included that show where some of the short-term rentals are clustered. So I definitely appreciate your feedback, the work, your expertise, Jamie.
Right. So I just want to add to, and where I was leading to is this short-term rental enforcement. We don't even know what that looks like yet, what the requirements will be above and beyond the certificate of compliance and meeting New York State Building Code. That will be a huge monumental task to enforce short-term rentals on top of what we already have that we are struggling to meet the requirements so that everybody has a certificate of compliance. I'd love to see that. But there's so many new buildings that were residences for 80 years being sold and turned over into short-term rentals or, private residences or rentals. So there's again, a huge wave of new responsibility in enforcing a housing code or housing inspection program.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons we're talking about short-term rental is that we don't have a policy, and yet we know it is happening. So we're kind of backing into this, but it is a time when we started talking about this on council pre-pandemic. And then the pandemic sort of took over everybody's work. I do see a couple of hands. Rob, I saw your hand, and then Cynthia.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and also everyone else. So a question. Yeah, it's going to be really helpful for us to wade through the different ways we interpret this. And it's also helpful. I'm looking at the data again to just get a handle on the scope of short-term rentals currently in the city. And looking at the ones that are active, unique, and residential listings that are renting an entire unit gives us a pretty clear picture. And I'm wondering, however this got organized, can you help me understand? Do we also know that these are properties that might go beyond, say, a total number of days a year as rented as a whole unit, or we haven't gotten to that level of granularity in this yet?
I think we have that level of granularity in this yet.
So that would
It means that
imply,
we have is that whether they're active listings on Airbnb,
So
not whether they're rented for a certain amount of time.
right, but that would imply then that they probably are rented most of the year, right? Not
You
just
could assume
part
that,
of the year.
you could assume that, but we don't really know for sure. Yeah,
Okay,
we
that-
probably need to gather more data to understand that.
Okay, that's helpful because I want to keep that in perspective as we're then looking at how we're going to, approach this from a policy standpoint. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I see that Tom has joined us as well. Cynthia, you had your hand up, and then Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm hearing you say that once these homes are being rented on a transient basis, based on building code definitions, it's now a business use, right? And I believe in R1 and R2 zones, that would require something called a home occupation, which goes through a whole permitting process that notifies neighbors. Is that correct? Is that how?
Home occupation is a different item, but it is an R1 use. Okay, that's a hotel use. Transient is R1 use by definition of New York State Building Code. And that's not allowed in the R1, R2, and R3 zoning districts, as I recall. That would be a question for me.
So this, again, you're a business use under the housing and building code is different than being classified as a business use under the zoning ordinance. And I'm not saying that it's something we want to continue allowing. But right now we don't have the definition of the 1 family or 2 family rental limited to a long term. It's not specified. The tenure of rental is not part of our current definition. Again, it does get very confusing that, to Jamie's point, it becomes a business use under building code and has to meet those requirements for safety, but that's different than what it is required, what it is defined as under zoning.
All of which we would, this would be what short-term rental regulation would do, would be to more clearly define these things and figure out how we want to present them in our zoning. And obviously housing code, they have to meet housing code no matter what, but
and just the comment from Jamie and Megan and Lisa amplifies the need for us to develop policy because it is confusing. Patrick, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, it was a little similar to Rob's question, but I guess when was this data pulled? Because I guess from my I guess expectation from a personal experience would be that the amount of Airbnbs that exists get a lot higher at Cornell and Ithaca College move-ins and graduate.
Yeah, it's just, this is a snapshot in time. You know, it doesn't, if we wanted to really know over a year what the trend was, we'd have to collect more data.
Right, but
Would you agree with that, John?
Yes, exactly, Lisa. It's a snapshot in time. And the date, if I'm not mistaken, it's March. Well, it's on the document, but sometime in March 1 or March 2.
March 1, 2022.
Perfect. Thank you. That's what I was curious about. What's the date?
And this is from the county tourism program, and they've been a great partner. And so I'm sure that they'd be willing to, provide additional snapshots.
And I think one of the questions is, do we want more data to justify taking on this policy, or is this sufficient? Do we really want to know exactly how many and exactly what they are, or is this enough information to move forward? Either answer is completely acceptable, of course.
Patrick?
I guess my thinking is we have enough data, but I would still like to collect the additional data if we can. At least I only asked about the additional because I don't graduate Cornell for another year, and I know that there's already hundreds booked that we've missed, for my parents coming for graduation. You know that people looking for Airbnbs for literally just 2 days skyrockets between last week and 3 weeks from now.
And that probably graduation weekend is never going to be a fair representation of how many Airbnbs or Airbnb usage there is in the city. And, many people rent their homes for that weekend through other platforms or just word of mouth too.
Right, exactly. You see, so I guess my short answer is I think we have enough data, but it is always fantastic to collect more.
Yeah, and I would second that. It seems that we have enough data to begin discussing policy direction, and simultaneously there is a desire to, going forward, collect more data.
What we can do, Laura, is we can get the Harmari data from the county, additional snapshots. To get any more data than we have available now would require purchasing licenses, a license from one of the third-party monitoring and compliance software companies that we've been looking into, which we can update you on what those services are at a future meeting.
Thank you. Cynthia, did you have a question?
I'm hoping my dog will stop barking. Yeah, thank you for this. I mean, I think we've been talking about this for quite a while. I'm looking back at emails from 2018, and then I just shared a report from 2021 that, Ithaca is one of the top rated, most profitable locations for Airbnb. The word is out. I think I see it in Ward 1, where homes that in the R1 and R2 zone are being converted to full-time Airbnb. These are homes that are not being used for residents and students who are here more than 8 months out of the year. So I do think that the need for a coordinated approach to this is necessary. I don't know that we need more data to substantiate that. So I'm happy to move forward with what we have.
Yeah, and again, I would agree with Patrick and Cynthia. I don't think we need more data to substantiate moving forward at this point. I would still like there to be additional snapshots at additional points in time.
Yes. And certainly if we do move forward and there's a third-party monitor, we will have much more data, all the time about what's really going on. So.
Yeah, and we've also seen, as many municipalities have, shifts during the pandemic, where some people from urban areas have chosen for vacations or getting away from their urban areas to look at short-term rentals in a community like Ithaca. I believe we've seen that in Ithaca. Rob, you had your hand up?
Yeah, it just touches on, Lisa just mentioned third-party monitoring. And I think I remember from Tom's presentation earlier that one of the things we'll also be exploring in that is also opportunities to help us with some level of enforcement, because I'm sensitive to Jamie's concerns. We know that there's a lot of pressure on our staffing across the city and including that area. So I want to make sure that we can be successful in that. And I know it's probably not the right time to be talking about that, but that is something that's coming, correct?
Yes, I think that we have to look at, as we're developing the, regulations, we have to look at the enforcement too. And the enforcement has to be scaled to what can actually be accomplished. So that would be certainly part of the discussion.
Yes, definitely part of the discussion. I think that point has come through clearly. Okay.
Well, thank
Other
you very
comments?
much.
Next steps, should we ask for staff to, yes, Rob.
Yeah, just one quick thing. As you might imagine, and probably is true in other parts of the city, this is a topic that's catching the attention of our neighborhood association. And they're asking for ways that they can contribute. So other than our normal public comment opportunities, do we have any advice for community members or organizations that want to participate?
I mean, I think once we have legislation, we know from experience, from looking at the town, it's likely going to take a long public dialogue once we have proposed legislation. And so I would imagine there'll be a lot of conversations. We haven't designed that, but certainly we'll look at that, how to take this to neighborhoods and listen to people's concerns. For sure.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, to Lisa's point and Rob's, many neighborhood organizations, I mean, Rob, you mentioned earlier regarding another topic that the Bryant Park Civic Association had a meeting recently. Other neighborhood associations, ward committees have meetings. And so as there is draft legislation, it would be possible, I imagine, for not only our committees to be discussing it, but to make sure that our residents know to tune into the meetings, or if they can't be here for the actual meeting, to watch the YouTube. And it might be possible to hold some small group informal sessions and perhaps a sort of town hall meeting.
And I'll make a quick note on the doorstep of its 100th anniversary. The Bryant Park Civic Association, which will turn 100 in 2023, just voted to rename itself the Bell Sherman Bryant Park Civic Association. So.
Interesting. Does that represent a merger?
I mean, I think we've always considered ourselves one community anyway. So it's,
yeah.
Think of Ithaca Road as the dividing line and we're crossing it. So.
All right. Well, that's great. More input from more residents, perhaps, at various meetings.
So can I just comment on that? Some of the complaints, I'm sorry, Cynthia, to cut in front of you. I don't get a lot of live time with council, so here I am. One of the areas, the most sensitive zone is the R1, and you mentioned Bell Sherman.
Yeah.
I get complaints from those zoning districts. Those same zoning districts that we require homeowner occupancy to rent. Okay. And now we're going to take that and put it to the side. I'm not so sure you won't see some torches coming down off the hill at nighttime to join you at the meeting, because these folks are going to be furious that anyone can rent out a home in their area where their homes are without some kind of public outcry for how is this possible? You know, someone will say, I have to occupy my single family dwelling unit with the ADU to rent and have a certificate, and these folks are being given a pass, so to speak.
Well,
my comment.
we don't have a policy yet. And I think some of us have heard from neighbors, from residents with exactly the comment, the complaint that you're referring to, Jamie. Yeah, so
Just a
that
heads
is
up.
something,
Just a
that
heads
is
up.
something
Yeah.
that we should be well aware of and incorporate into whatever we're developing going forward. Yeah, and don't worry, Jamie, I have a feeling you'll be coming back to city meetings.
That falls under careful what you wish for.
Yes, yes.
You're on the docket now, Jamie.
Cynthia, did you have another comment or question?
Yes, I do. And so when do you think that there might be a draft for us to consider? Because I do think that there's a timeliness impact here. As we talked about earlier, we have a housing shortage of all different types. And as more and more of these units get taken off to become full-time Airbnbs, and I think that the data is showing that if this is the list for March, like what is it going to be, other parts of the year? So I definitely want to get a sense of timing as to when this will come back so that we can
We
keep
hope
this
to have
discussion
draft
going.
legislation in the late summer. So let us map out, the next, in more detail, the next steps we need and the next guidance we need from you, but have.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, as we know, this is a discussion. This is the second PEDC meeting where we have had this discussion. We asked for additional information last month. That's been provided, and there will be other discussions. And certainly when you're developing the draft legislation, that too will be discussed. I see Duxon's hand up, and I want to make sure he has opportunity to comment or question.
Thanks, Laura. I just wanted to bring up, I'm definitely supportive of moving forward for all the reasons that have been discussed. But to be a little defensive in favor of STRs, when I floated in the past in a neutral way, I've gotten pushback that wouldn't you rather have that money go to me, a resident, a homeowner, than like this multinational corporation that owns a hotel, or that they use it to supplement their income. I don't think like if we've used the town's legislation as a model, then I don't think they have much to worry about, because the town was very deliberate in preventing the full-time STRs that Cynthia's been talking about, while still allowing the hosted, I think it's called, the hosted STRs to continue. So I'm supportive. I don't think that'll be an issue, but I do want to raise that I often get pushback on any kind of regulation for those reasons. And we should recognize too that it took the town 4 years to pass something, in part because there was just rabid opposition to increased regulation of STRs. And so I don't anticipate it to be super easy.
I mean, as it's been mentioned, there are lots of STRs that are, full house, full-time STRs. If you say, if the regulation is that isn't allowed anymore, that's where you're going to get the pushback from the people who own those properties.
Right. Yeah. And to be clear, I am not worried about that pushback. I'm on team prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
Some of our initial discussions around timeline have included the idea that we might allow for a grace period prior to implementation, such as, if we were able to pass something as early as the end of this year. That may not happen, but if we were, having a grace period that'll in which the regulation would take effect August 1, which is when a lot of leases turn over. So it gives people a chance to get a tenant in there, and a long-term tenant if they are renting out on Airbnb. So providing for that kind of flexibility for anyone who is currently renting out full-time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right. That I think when we're looking at change, it's important to have grace period so that we're not catching people in the middle of arrangements they've been made. But also to Cynthia's point, and the point that has been made by many others around this discussion, we do have a serious housing shortage. And I know that as one of my kids and his wife are looking to buy an apartment, they're finding that apartment, and this is not in Ithaca, it's in another state, they are seeing that things get bought up very rapidly, and are used for Airbnb. So there's no relationship with the owner, no owner occupancy. This is not short-term rental. It's long-term, short-term rental.
We need a new definition.
So I think we want to be sensitive to the impact on the housing shortage for residents that we have. Other comments and questions? Okay, staff, do you feel like you've got some direction?
Yes, I do. I feel like we do.
Okay, good. And we will definitely see you back. Thank you, Megan and Jamie. We will hope to see both of you back in the future.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for your work. It's been a long, hard haul for folks in the building department. So thank you. Okay. I think that brings us up to review of the minutes, February minutes. Anyone like to move February minutes? Rob, thank you. Is there a second? Patrick? All those in favor of approving the February minutes? That looks unanimous. I'm just very glad that my internet hung on. I got kicked off the meeting twice. And this time I'm in the meeting from home. The last time I got kicked off a meeting was from City Hall. So not sure what it is, but we will at some point get back to in-person meetings. And along those lines, it looks as though we have approval for virtual meetings running through June 8. So I believe next month's Common Council and PEDC meeting, we should plan for virtual meetings, and we will be assessing on a regular basis as we move forward based on the recommendation from the scientific community, the medical community in the county. All right, everyone, have a good evening, and thanks for a very good and productive meeting.
Did you motion to adjourn?
Thank you, everyone.
Motion to adjourn. Patrick.
Motion to adjourn and second.
Patrick moved and everybody seconded. Phoebe, did you? Phoebe had your hand up. Phoebe seconded.
Phoebe.
I second it.
Yeah.
Rob moved, Phoebe seconded. All in favor of adjourning?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you,
Good
everybody.
night.
Night.
And Lisa,
Oh, hang on, we're still live streaming.
Okay.
Deb, can you stop the live stream?
I don't
please?
know what the internet.
Deb, can you stop the live stream?
I can catch up with you tomorrow. I hope I didn't miss much when I got my internet.
Oh, I don't think so. Yeah, no, there were a
Okay.
lot of people, and yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
Good.
All right.
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you. Good meeting.
All right. Bye.
Night.